Same oppression, different results. The French got Napoleon. The Russians got Stalin. The Americans got Washington. What's the difference? Every revolution promises freedom, but most deliver tyranny. Tonight, we're uncovering why some revolutions create democracy while others create dictatorships. From the American colonies to Soviet Russia, we'll reveal the simple patterns that decide whether a revolution saves people or destroys them. By the end, you'll know exactly what separates the winners from the losers. Think about this. In 1776, American colonists rebelled against Britain. In 1789, French peasants rebelled against their king. Both groups faced the same problem: unfair rulers who ignore their people. Both wanted the same thing: freedom and better lives. But look what happened. America got George Washington, who stepped down after 2 terms and created a democracy that still works today. France got Robespierre, who cut off so many heads that they eventually cut off his too. Then came Napoleon, who made himself emperor and dragged Europe into decades of war. Same problem, same goal, completely different results. This isn't luck. It's not coincidence. There are actual rules that determine whether a revolution succeeds or fails. And once you understand these rules, you'll see why most revolutions are doomed from the start. Let's start with the Americans. They did almost everything right, even though they probably didn't know it at the time. Have clear, limited goals. The Americans didn't want to change the world. They just wanted Britain to stop taxing them without giving them a say in government. They weren't trying to create perfect society or eliminate all inequality. They had one simple demand: no taxation without representation. Compare this to other revolutions. The French wanted to eliminate all inequality forever. The Russians wanted to create a perfect communist society. The more impossible your goals, the more likely you are to fail. Keep your elite class happy. Here's something most people don't realize. Successful revolutions need rich, educated people on their side. The American colonists had wealthy merchants, smart lawyers, and successful plantation owners leading the fight. These people had money, connections, and political experience. When your smartest, richest people support the revolution, you can actually govern after you win. When they oppose it, you're in trouble. The French Revolution killed off most of their educated elite. The Russian Revolution did the same thing. Then they wondered why their countries fell apart. Get Foreign helped. The Americans were smart enough to get France, Spain, and Holland to help them fight Britain. This gave them money, weapons, and most importantly, legitimacy. Other countries saw America as a real nation, not just a bunch of rebels. Revolutions that fight alone usually lose. Revolutions that make powerful allies usually win. Build new institutions while the French were busy destroying everything. The Americans were building new systems. They wrote the Constitution. They created the Supreme Court. They established checks and balances. They thought about how to govern, not just how to rebel. Most revolutions are great at tearing things down, but terrible at building them back up. The Americans understood that destroying the old system was only half the job. Now let's look at failure. The French Revolution should have worked. France was rich, powerful, and advanced. The king was weak and unpopular. The people were educated and angry. Everything was perfect for a successful revolution. Instead, it became a bloodbath that ended with a dictator. Promising too much, the French revolutionaries promised to create a perfect society where everyone was equal and free. They wanted to eliminate not just bad government, but all unfairness, all inequality, all suffering. When you promise paradise, anything less than paradise feels like failure. Killing the wrong people, the French Revolution started by executing the king and queen. Fair enough, they were the problem. But then they started killing anyone who disagreed with them. First the nobles, then the priests, then the moderate revolutionaries, then the radical revolutionaries. By the end, they were executing people for not being revolutionary enough. The revolution was eating its own supporters. This always happens when you promise perfection. Anyone who points out problems becomes an enemy. Destroying everything at once, the French didn't just get rid of the monarchy. They tried to eliminate the church, the aristocracy, the old legal system, even the calendar. They wanted to wipe out 1,000 years of French history and start over from scratch. This created chaos. When you destroy all your institutions at once, you have nothing left to hold society together. People need rules, systems, and familiar structures. When you eliminate everything, you get anarchy. The reign of terror in just 14 months, the French revolutionary government executed over 16,000 people. But here's the crazy part. Most of them weren't enemies of the revolution. They were revolutionaries who weren't pure enough. Maximilien Robespierre, the leader of the terror, genuinely believed he was creating a better world. He thought that killing impure people would make society perfect. Instead, he created such fear that eventually his own allies turned against him. He died under the same guillotine he'd used to kill thousands. This is what happens when revolutions become obsessed with purity. They start murdering their own people. But the French terror was nothing compared to what happened in Russia. The Russian Revolution of 1917 was supposed to liberate humanity from oppression forever. Instead, it created the most oppressive system in human history. The promise Vladimir Lenin and the Bolsheviks promised to create a workers' paradise. No more rich people exploiting poor people. No more war. No more inequality. Everyone would be equal and free. The reality within a few years, the Soviet Union was murdering millions of its own people. Stalin's government killed more Soviet citizens than Hitler killed Jews. The revolution that promised to eliminate oppression became the most oppressive force on earth. How did this happen? The same way it always happens. The Bolshevik mistakes the Bolsheviks made every mistake the Americans avoided. They promised unlimited change. They destroyed all existing institutions. They eliminated their educated classes. They isolated themselves from other countries. They defined success as the complete transformation of human nature. When reality didn't match their promises, they used violence to force it. If people weren't grateful for liberation, they must be enemies. If society wasn't transforming fast enough, more force was needed. If the revolution wasn't working, it needed more revolution. This is the death spiral of failed revolutions. The more you promise, the more you must deliver. The more you must deliver, the more violence you need. The more violence you use, the more enemies you create. The more enemies you create, the more you must kill your own people to survive. Winners versus losers now, you can see the pattern. It's actually pretty simple, winning revolutions. Want to fix specific problems, not change everything, keep their smart, rich people on their side, get help from other countries, build new systems while removing old ones, promise what they can actually deliver. Losing revolutions. Want to create perfect society, destroy their educated classes, fight alone against the world, tear down everything without building replacements, promise impossible things. Why this matters today, understanding revolutionary failure isn't just about history. It's about right now. Because revolutions are happening all around us. The Arab Spring in 2011, millions of people across the Middle East overthrew their dictators. Everyone thought democracy was coming to the Arab world. But look what happened. Egypt got a military dictatorship worse than before. Libya became a failed state with slave market. Syria exploded in a civil war. Yemen collapsed in a famine and chaos. Only Tunisia succeeded, and only because they followed the American model. Limited goals, elite support, gradual change. Modern patterns, the same patterns appear everywhere. Venezuela's revolution promised to eliminate poverty. Instead, it created hyperinflation and starvation. The Iranian Revolution promised to create a just Islamic society. Instead, it created a brutal theocracy that oppresses women and minorities. Why do people keep making the same mistakes? Because revolutionary movements are emotional, not logical. They're born from anger, not careful planning. They promise what people want to hear, not what's actually possible. How finance shapes revolution. Here's something most people don't understand. Revolutions are expensive. They need money, weapons, supplies, and communications. Revolutionary movements that can't get enough resources usually fail. The American advantage: the Americans had access to international credit. French banks lent them money. Spanish, and Dutch merchants sold them weapons. This foreign support was crucial to their success. The Russian Revolution, but here's where it gets interesting. The Russian Revolution succeeded partly because it was funded by foreign banks. German intelligence gave Lenin money to destabilize Russia during World War I. Wall Street banks provided financing to both sides of the conflict. Revolutionary movements often succeed not because they're popular, but because they're useful to foreign powers. The revolution you see might not be the revolution you're getting. Character determines everything ultimately. Revolutionary success depends on leadership. And here's the key insight. The character of revolutionary leaders determines the fate of entire nations. George Washington, the leader who gave up power. Washington could have been America's first king. His officers wanted him to seize power. The government was weak and chaotic. He had the army and the popularity to become dictator. Instead, he resigned. He walked away from power when he could have taken it. This single decision made America a democracy instead of a monarchy. The dictator pattern. Compare this to every failed revolutionary leader. They all believed they were too important to step down. Robespierre thought only he could preserve the revolution. Lenin thought only he could build communism. Castro thought only he could protect Cuba. Mao thought only he could modernize China. They all shared the same fatal flaw. They believed their own propaganda. They thought they were irreplaceable. They confused their personal power with the revolution's success. The Washington model: successful revolutionary leaders understand their limitations. They know when to stop. They choose progress over perfection. They build systems that can survive without them. Washington understood that the revolution's success depended on limiting his own power. Every failed revolutionary leader believed success depended on expanding theirs. Systems matter more than speeches. Revolutions don't succeed because of inspiring speeches or heroic battles. They succeed because they create institutions that last longer than their founders. The American system, the Constitution, the Supreme Court, the system of checks and balances, these institutions were designed to work regardless of who was in charge. They assumed leaders well. The destruction pattern: failed revolutions destroy institutions faster than they can build them. The French eliminated the monarchy, but created nothing to replace it. The Russians destroyed the church, but offered no alternative moral authority. The Chinese eliminated the educated class, but had no one prepared to govern. Revolutionary movements that focus on destruction always fail. Revolutionary movements that focus on construction sometimes succeed. Why stories matter: modern revolutions face a new challenge: controlling information. In the age of social media, revolutionary success depends as much on controlling the narrative as controlling territory. The social media problem: revolutionary movements are great at exposing problems, but terrible at proposing solutions. They can tear down existing systems, but can't build replacements. They can mobilize anger, but can't sustain hope. This is why most social media revolutions fail. They create viral moments, but not lasting change. They generate enormous energy, but lack institutional foundation. The successful strategy: the most successful modern movements combine online mobilization with offline institution building. They use social media to recruit supporters, but use traditional organizing to create lasting change. Global context matters. No revolution happens in isolation. International support often determines domestic success. Timing is everything. The American Revolution succeeded partly because it aligned with French interests against Britain. The Russian Revolution succeeded partly because it happened during World War I. The Chinese Revolution succeeded partly because it followed World War II. Revolutionary movements that ignore international context usually fail. They make enemies of potential allies. They misread global power dynamics. They assume domestic support equals international legitimacy. But here's the scary truth. Understanding why revolutions fail doesn't prevent them from happening. In fact, it might make them more likely. Our current systems are showing all the warning signs that historically lead to revolutionary upheaval. Our governments make promises they can't keep. Our economies create problems they can't solve. Our societies generate conflicts they can't resolve. We're creating the exact conditions that produce revolutionary movements. And when those revolutions come, they'll probably fail for the same reasons they've always failed. They'll promise too much, destroy too much, and deliver too little. They'll create more problems than they solve. They'll generate more chaos than they control. The question isn't whether revolutions will happen, it's whether any of them will succeed. And based on history, the answer is probably no. What can we do? How do we avoid the revolutionary trap that destroys societies? Revolution versus reform. The answer is understanding the difference between revolution and reform. Revolution promises to solve all problems immediately. Reform promises to solve some problems gradually. History shows that reform works better than revolution. The British Empire didn't collapse in violence. It gradually became the Commonwealth. Slavery wasn't eliminated through slave revolts. It was abolished through legal processes. Women didn't gain equality through armed uprising. They won it through political organizing. The reform advantage. Reform requires patience. It demands that we accept imperfection while working toward improvement. It requires building rather than destroying, including rather than excluding, compromise rather than conquest. This is why reform movements often succeed where revolutionary movements fail. They work with human nature rather than against it. They use existing systems rather than destroying them. The civil rights example. The American civil rights movement understood this. Instead of trying to overthrow the system, they tried to fulfill its promises. Instead of declaring war on white America, they appealed to its conscience. Instead of demanding immediate perfection, they accepted gradual progress. The result was the most successful social transformation in American history. Not because it was revolutionary, but because it was reformist. The choice we face. Every society facing injustice has a choice: revolution or reform, destruction or construction, perfection or progress. The revolutionary path. Revolution promises everything immediately. It offers to solve all problems through one dramatic change. It appeals to anger and impatience. It sounds exciting and heroic. The reform path. Reform promises gradual improvement. It offers to solve problems step by step. It appeals to reason and patience. It sounds boring and slow, but here's the key insight. Boring and slow usually works. Exciting and dramatic usually fails. The historical record. Failed revolutions don't just leave society unchanged, they leave it worse. They destroy institutions without building replacements. They eliminate leaders without developing successors. They create chaos without providing order. The French Revolution gave France Napoleon. The Russian Revolution gave Russia Stalin. The Iranian Revolution gave Iran the Ayatollahs. Failed revolutions create tyranny, not freedom. This brings us to the crucial moment, the choice that determines whether societies thrive or collapse. The seductive appeal of revolution is seductive because it promises to solve everything at once. It offers immediate gratification for long-term problems. It appeals to our desire for dramatic change and heroic action. The harsh reality, but revolution is also dangerous because it usually fails. And when it fails, it doesn't just leave things unchanged, it makes them worse. It creates the very problems it promised to solve. The wisdom of restraint. The most successful societies are those that choose reform over revolution. They understand that slow progress is better than dramatic failure. They accept imperfection while working toward improvement. This requires wisdom, patience, and humility. It requires accepting that change takes time, that progress isn't always visible, that compromise is sometimes necessary. The historical examples. We have examples of successful transformation. Britain evolved from monarchy to democracy without revolution. Germany rebuilt itself after World War II through reform, not revolution. South Korea transformed from dictatorship to democracy through gradual change. These examples prove that peaceful transformation is possible. Societies can evolve from injustice to justice, from oppression to freedom, from poverty to prosperity. The question is whether we're wise enough to choose the difficult path of reform over the seductive path of revolution. The rules of revolution are simple but brutal. Most revolutions fail because they promise what they cannot deliver. They create expectations they cannot meet. They generate conflicts they cannot resolve. The success formula: successful revolutions share specific characteristics. Limited, achievable goals, support from educated, wealthy people, help from other countries, focus on building, not just destroying realistic expectations about what's possible. The failure formula: failed revolutions do the opposite. Promise perfect society, destroy their educated classes, fight alone against the world, focus on destruction without construction, create impossible expectations. The American example: the American Revolution succeeded because it followed the success formula. It had clear goals, elite support, foreign help, and institutional focus. It promised what it could deliver and delivered what it promised. The French and Russian examples: the French and Russian revolutions failed because they followed the failure formula. They promised paradise and delivered hell. They destroyed more than they built. They created more problems than they solved. The modern lesson: understanding these patterns doesn't guarantee success, but it shows us the path forward. We can choose reform over revolution, construction over destruction, progress over perfection. We can build institutions that outlast their creators. We can create systems that serve their citizens. We can forge societies that balance justice with stability. The real revolution isn't in the streets, it's in the mind. It's choosing building over burning, healing over harming, hope over hatred. It's the revolution that changes the world without destroying it. And that's the revolution that actually wins. The choice is ours. But history warns us: choose carefully. Because revolutions that fail don't just leave society unchanged, they leave it broken. And some things, once broken, can never be repaired.